Margaret and H.A. Ray's Curious George Feeds the Animals. This is George. George was a good little monkey and always very, very curious. One day, George went to the zoo with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. A new rainforest exhibit was opening, and they wanted to be the first ones inside. But when they got to the new exhibit, the doors were closed. "We'll have to come back later, George," the man said. "Why don't we visit the other animals while we wait?" First, they stopped to watch a zookeeper feed the seals. When he tossed little fish into the air, the seals jumped up to catch them. Then they barked, barked, barked for more. It looked like fun to feed the animals. "Would you like some peanuts to eat too, George?" asked the man with the yellow hat, and he bought a snack for them to share. When they stopped to see the crocodile, George remembered how the zookeeper had fed fish to the seals. He was curious. Would the crocodile like something to eat? George tossed him a treat, and the crocodile snapped it right out of the air. Next, they visited the koalas. George thought that the koalas were very cute. He was a friendly one. She was curious too. She wanted to see what George was eating, so he held out his hand to share. George shared his peanuts with an elephant and a baby kangaroo. George was making lots of new friends at the zoo. The lion was already eating, but the hippopotamus tried a snack. Next, he gave a treat to an ostrich. When George saw the giraffes, what fun to feed a giraffe! Giraffes usually have their heads high up in trees, but George could see that these giraffes would be very easy to feed. For on the ground below was where their feet were, and up at the top floor where they were was their heads. But as soon as he held out his hand, a zookeeper came running. The zookeeper looked angry. Was he angry with George? George didn't know, and he didn't want to stay to find out. He slipped away, and the giraffes were happy to help. Right down the neck he slid. But where did George go? He was trying his best to hide, but little monkeys can't stay still for long. When George wiggled in a bush, the zookeeper was waiting. "I see you," he grumbled. Just then another zookeeper hurried by. "Come quick," she yelled. "Someone saw the parrot." The first zookeeper led George to a bench. "The parrot escaped from our new exhibit, and I must help find it," he explained. He told George to wait for him there, and before he left, he said, "Don't you know you're not supposed to feed the animals? The wrong food might make all of them sick." George felt awful. He didn't know he wasn't supposed to feed the animals. He didn't want to make them all sick. George was looking at the treat in his hand when all of a sudden, a big bird swooped down and snatched it right up, knocking over his basket of peanuts onto the ground. Now George knew he wasn't supposed to feed the animals, but this one had helped himself. A zookeeper passing by was happy to see George. "You found the parrot," she said. "We've been looking for this bird all day." When she saw George's snack, she said, "This isn't the best thing in the world to feed a parrot, but a little won't hurt. Would you like to help me put him back where he belongs?" George was glad to help after all the trouble he had caused, and together they went back to the exhibit. "There's our problem," the zookeeper said, pointing to a hole in the netting. As the zookeepers discussed how to fix it, George had an idea. He climbed up like only a monkey could, all the way up to the top of the netting. He tied the netting back together. Meanwhile, the first zookeeper returned. "Catch that naughty monkey!" he yelled at the top of his lungs. "He was feeding the animals peanuts!" "But that little monkey found the parrot," another zookeeper told him. "And look, he fixed the netting. Now we can open the exhibit." When George came down, all the zookeepers cheered. "Hooray for George!" Finally, the celebration began, and the doors were opened. The man was there, and he and George got to be the first ones inside. As George walked in, the zookeepers thanked him for all of his help. "Please visit any time," the second zookeeper thanked him. George couldn't wait to come back and see his friends, but next time he'd remember, unless you're a zookeeper, don't feed the animals.